Thank you, Chair. We're live on YouTube, so I'll hand over the meeting to you.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Right, good morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Exmouth Queen's Drive Delivery Group on September the 7th, 2021. I'm your chair, Councillor Nick Hookway. Based on the decision of our extraordinary meeting of council on the 26th of July, I would like to remind both members and the public attending or watching that this council has delegated much of its decision-taking powers to our senior officers. This is for a short period of time only, to the 17th of January 2022, and is due to concerns relating to COVID risk. Consequently, this meeting is being held remotely and on a consultative basis only. We will continue to adhere as close as possible to the procedure rules detailed in our constitution. However, where this meeting would normally have decided a matter, it will now make a recommendation to a senior officer. The officer will then take that recommendation into account when making their decision. This meeting can be viewed online, live online, and will be recorded. Please bear this in mind throughout the meeting. Therefore, may I remind colleagues to be careful with their language and that the code of conduct applies throughout our meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this meeting is dependent upon an internet connection on a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. If we are not able to reconnect after 15 minutes, this meeting will be adjourned and reconvened at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for further details. Could colleagues please ensure that their microphones are muted when you are not speaking? This will help avoid any disturbance from background noise. Could you please also keep your points short and not interrupt when someone else is speaking? Should you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any member of the public can view the agenda by visiting our website at www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hookway.
Present.
Councillor Arnott. No, not yet. Councillor Hayward.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowland. No. Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman. No. Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor De Sarum.
Present, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Whibley. No. Councillor Wright. No. Councillor Aurora Bailey.
Present, Sarah.
Thank you. And Councillor Gazzard.
Present, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Agenda item 1, public speaking. I understand that we have one member of the public who wishes to speak, and that is Mr. Robert Cathro. So, Mr. Cathro, you have 3 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you for that, Chairman, and good morning, councillors. Pleased to meet you. Robert Castro, a resident of Exmouth. I've got 3 minutes. I'll be really brief. I've got 4 slides which can be made available after my chat, and I'll share my screen now. No, I won't, because it's been disabled. I don't know if that can be re-enabled or not. Not to worry. I'll chop through them and send them in by email. So I wanted to cover some background to why I'm speaking this morning, and it's really a request to the Queen's Drive Delivery Group for some help. I want to describe what residents are thinking, what we'd like to achieve, and ask the group if they can help by supporting the initiative we're taking and work out how best to achieve our aims. So if I had my slides, I'd be showing you a simple slide saying, what's the problem? And I'm sure councillors are aware that there's multiple minor issues in the town that just aren't being addressed. variously known as boy racers, problems of traffic versus pedestrians and cyclists, camper vans, antisocial behaviour, control of dogs, pollution, and a whole host more. Each one on its own is minor, but collectively they affect thousands of residents. This is made tricky to solve by the complex governance, which I'm sure you're well aware of, with 3 tiers and multiple other agencies. We've got growing population and visitor numbers, repeated claims of not enough money. We're not enforcing the rules that do exist for good reason, and we don't seem to be able to keep up with new demands placed on the town. So despite some promising initiatives, and well done to all involved, it's not working well enough for residents. So what have we been doing in the background? We're offering help. It's a group of a large and growing group of residents offering help and also asking for help from councillors. Recent meetings and discussions that we've held have concluded that somehow the town needs a multi-agency group with resident membership to involve residents who experience the issues daily and help us to help you solve them, to develop integrated solutions that avoid unintended consequences and drive the policy, administrative and budget decisions to make enforcement a reality, and also come up with ways around the budget constraints. There's a draft multi-agency TAF proposal that's been prepared, which is available. It sets out what we'd like to achieve. And now it requires some work to try and fit this proposal in with the existing structure. I mean, we're well aware that there are lots of TAFs, and there's indeed this group. And we're asking, it's my last point, this group to help make this happen. Over to you, really. We want to make Exmouth the best seaside town with ever-increasing green credentials, pedestrian and cyclist friendly, with common sense standards of public behaviour prevalent. That's back to the antisocial points I made at the start. Continuous improvement towards these goals and with some joined up thinking. And we'd like to start this autumn in October. And that's my conclusion. Shall I send those slides to somebody in the meeting, Chairman?
Yes, you can send them to me. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for listening. We're not expecting an instant solution, but I was just trying to share with you what we're up to, and we think this group may be able to help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Right. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cathro, for your contribution. You are very welcome to stay in the meeting for as long as you like, or you can continue to watch the meeting live on the Council's YouTube channel.
Right. Chair, Chair, I had my yellow hand up.
Yes.
I wonder if I might make a brief response to that, please. Mr.
Well,
Cathro,
you're not on the committee, on the group, Councillor Ragg. I was going to let you
but it might be helpful information, Mr. Cathro. I don't know if you're aware. You made several references to we. There is an association, Exmouth Community Association, which is a public voice, and I don't know whether you're aware of that, but
yes.
You know, that would be the proper channel.
Yes, they have spoken to this group previously, I believe. Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Desarum, you have your hand up.
I did. Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair. I have been regularly, as you have, receiving Mr. Cathro's updates and his photographs. And I think we're all very grateful for the input. But I think that's something that you, myself, Chair, and Councillor Wright, as ward members, I think, along with Councillor Christine Channon, I think that's something we need to look at off this Queen's Drive meeting. And we need to get together with Ms. Cathro at some point and actually work through the issues. Because as he rightly says, some of them relate to the police, some of them are those. I mean, we've had this enforcement issue, which you announced the other day through your public relations thing, where you spoke to the police and got the enforcement action. And I think it is something that we can't all do together. And I think that the purpose of this meeting was to progress the Queen's Drive decisions forward. So I obviously, I think we should work together with that, Chair, offline. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, happy to do that, Councillor Desarum. Yes, good idea. Thank you very much. Okay, right. So moving on then to agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of March 2021. So do any members of the committee have comments on the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of March 2021? If so, please raise your electronic hand. I see Councillor Megan Armstrong has her hand raised. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's just something that, and I think other members of the delivery group may also have received an email from a member of the public, which I also forwarded on to you, Chair,
Yes.
a couple of days ago, and you gave me a sort of a response to that. But I just wondered whether you'd like to, for the record, just to just to state what your response would be on the issues that were raised. So it was about Adrian Toole. This was at the last meeting. Car parking and signage. The sign on Salterton Road, which has been removed from Cypress Road to Seafront, and as another issue at the end, yeah, if you're able to respond to that would be good, and then we've got it on record.
Yes, you mean as matters arising, you mean? I have spoken privately following our meeting with Adrian Toole,
right.
Exmouth, and he has, I think, revised his views and has decided to consider some pop-up events where they will put forward some ideas, and they did that, I think, recently over the weekend at Sideshow. But in terms of scoping, no scoping has been taken place because we are awaiting resources, and that will be part of agenda item 6. So the other one was to do with the removal of a sign on the Salterton Road. I have raised that with Street Scene, and that is being followed up. And we'll report about that later on. And the other issue was to do with, what was the other issue, Councillor?
Well, the statement that the current temporary uses could be established on a permanent basis. Temporary.
Yes, we'll come on to that later on.
We'll be discussing that later. Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you, Chair.
So any more comments about the minutes? Thank you. Okay, so the minutes are recommended for approval by senior officers. Right. Okay, agenda item 3, apologies. Sarah, do you have any apologies?
No, I haven't received any apologies, Chair.
Right. Well, I have, and I can therefore tell you that I have received apologies from councillors Rowland, Whibley and Wright.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, right. So agenda item 4 then, declarations of interest. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
Yes, I have a declaration. I was a member, was chair of Save Exmouth Seafront until my election in May 2019, and I am no longer predetermined as to any particular outcome that this committee group recommends. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
None whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger. Councillor Ledger, you're on mute at the moment. Oh, I think he's just gone, so we'll come back to him. Councillor Arnott. No, beg your pardon. Councillor Armstrong.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman. Has Councillor Coleman joined the meeting yet? No. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I'm an Exmouth Town Councillor, and I also received the same communication, I think, as Megan did from a member of the public outlining the same issues, but I think Megan has raised most of the ones she did.
Thank you. Councillor De Sarum.
Yes, Exmouth Town Councillor representing Little Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
None.
Councillor Bailey.
An Exmouth Town Councillor. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. And Councillor Gazzard.
Exmouth Town Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just come back to Councillor Ledger.
Sorry about that, Sarah. I
That's
couldn't
all right.
unmute or do anything. None from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 5, the planning position update, pages 10 to 18 on your information. I will now ask Officer Tim Child to present the update. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, before I present, I'll introduce you actually to Ed Freeman in a minute. Firstly, can I just apologise? A couple of the reports were later than usual this time. I'm afraid I take responsibility for that. I was on an extended period of leave during August, so apologies, but you should have received the paperwork just before the weekend. So hopefully you've had time to view the reports fully. Planning position update. So you have a short report from myself with a much more detailed position statement from Ed Freeman, our service lead for planning, strategy and development management. I'm going to pass you over to Ed shortly, and Ed will talk you through the through the document. The document, it's an information document, but I suppose the purpose of raising it today is to seek members' views on what actions in particular should be taken in respect of the renewal of the planning permission for temporary uses that expires early next year. Within the covering report, there's no recommendation as such, with any recommendation, if indeed there is to be one, to come from the debate that I'm sure will follow shortly. So if I can now pass you over to Ed, please.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, members. So yes, the planning position statement hopefully is a helpful document in talking members through some of the planning history of the site, which is quite complex. I tried to start off by looking at the site-wide redevelopment. The members will hopefully be aware was granted outline planning permission back in January 2014 and encompassed the full Queen's Drive site redevelopment, including the Water Sports Centre, holiday accommodation and the redevelopment of the Harbourview Cafe and London buildings bounded by Madeira Walk, the bowling club to the north, the cricket ground and the Mare to the east, down to the beach and Queen's Drive. That permission was outline only, with all reserved matters to be made by the 24th of January 2017. A couple of reserved matters applications were made. The only one that was actually taken forward really was the realignment of the Queen's Drive as the road, because the Water Sports Centre ultimately came in as a full planning application in its own right and didn't rely on the outline consent. So the net result of all of that is that the outline consent has now lapsed, so there is no extant permission for the redevelopment of the area. In terms of the temporary uses, the existing temporary consent expires on the 15th of February 2022. There is an issue there in terms of further temporary consents, as I've said, because really the legislation is about trial runs in effect through the temporary consents to test the impacts of a use over a period of time to determine if it is acceptable on a permanent basis. The intention of the legislation isn't to give successive temporary consents. That's not to say that you can't, it is guidance, and obviously we don't have to follow guidance, but you know, a strong case would need to be made as to why a further temporary consent was justified in the face of that guidance, and obviously members might need to consider the risks associated with doing so. From a planning point of view, I think the temporary consents that have occurred have demonstrated that the uses are acceptable on a permanent basis, and there's been no real planning reason not to grant a permanent consent for those uses, to my mind. But obviously that's in advance of an application being made and further assessment. In terms of the permanent redevelopment of the area, you'll probably be aware the site has been put forward in the Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment, so that is being looked at through the local plan process as a potential mixed use leisure development as part of a wider seafront town or sub-region regeneration scheme. The site has a number of challenges, not least it being in a flood zone and habitat mitigations issues that members will be aware of in relation to our European protected habitats of the estuary and the Pebblebed Heaths. I say European protection is obviously now embedded in local legislation rather than European. That does raise some issues for me in terms of production of the local plan, in terms of having clarity about members' intentions in relation to Queen's Drive. I've put in at the towards the end of the report the timetable for the local plan production. And obviously, if proposals for the redevelopment of the Queen's Drive area were to be incorporated into the local plan, we would need to have some clarity about what the nature of that redevelopment would be, and be undertaking evidence gathering on its impacts imminently, really, if we're going to incorporate that into the local plan that's now emerging. So there is a time constraint there, I think, from a planning perspective, in terms of understanding members' intentions there, and if and how that's then incorporated into the local plan process. So hopefully that gives the useful summary of where we are in terms of the planning position. Appendix 1 gives you a full rundown of all of the planning applications that have come through. As you can see, there's been quite a few, and the numbers down the left-hand side of the page, if they're put into the search engine on our website, you can full view details of those applications if you so wish. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Ed. And I'll now go to non-members first. And I have one non-member that I can see, and that is Councillor Paul Miller.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for this report. It's a very interesting report. And I do have two questions in relation to it. Firstly, given the considerable flood risk and environmental harm that residential accommodation could have in this area, I ask how did it get to this point that hotel and residential accommodation could get into an outline planning permission by the council, which has now expired? How could that take place given the considerable risk? And secondly, on the legal, on the continuing temporary uses, in your view, Ed, what is the likelihood of such a legal challenge coming forward? And, you know, would it be your recommendation that we make these temporary uses permanent on that basis? Thank you.
Okay. Ed, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, the flood risk issues obviously existed when the outline consent was granted back in 2014. So I'm not saying that they are necessarily a barrier that would prevent a further consent for similar nature of uses, but there is a whole process we would have to go through in terms of assessing the flood risk. So a detailed flood risk assessment would have to be carried out. There's then a sequential test to be applied and a potential exceptions test that can be applied for regeneration sites. And I think that's what was applied back in 2014 as an exemptions test, which then justifies some of that risk in terms of the economic benefits, the regeneration benefits of that development. So there is a whole process that we can go through. So I'm not ruling it out. All I'm saying is that it's not straightforward. There are constraints to the site that would need to be carefully considered again through that application process. In terms of the temporary uses, as I say, it's guidance, so we could grant a further temporary consent if that's members' wish. Obviously, we'd have to give some thought as officers as to what we actually recommended in terms of that, given that I'm struggling to see a reason why it would need to be temporary again from a planning perspective. But I would have thought the risk of being challenged for granting a further temporary consent was pretty low, to be honest.
You refer to it, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but you refer to it in the report, the risks of such an approach being challenged through a legal challenge and any reputational harm. So it's you've mentioned it. So I just
Yes, well, there is a risk, and obviously members would have to consider that risk in deciding whether to grant a temporary consent or not. But I believe you asked for my opinion on the risk of that challenge, and what I'm saying is I think, in my opinion, that risk is relatively small.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Councillor Miller. When I go to the committee, Councillor Bruce Desaram, your hand was up first.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ed. As ever, that was a very useful summary of the position. So I'm going to dive straight in and ask the members present whether I will find support if we could actually do the impact assessment, as you say, on things said, because they had not been fully assessed in terms of their impact on the European protected habitats. So I'm going to ask if members present would like to do that. and then I'm going to ask about the Zone 3, whether we would do a test, as we are a delivery committee. So I think those two items, and also whether we can make progress to put it into the local plan. As you say, this timetable would appear to make it impossible to incorporate. So what I'm suggesting is, do I have a seconder from the committee to work through these three most difficult issues identified so that we can actually get to deliver a plan? I'm not asking for anything to be put on the site. I'm asking for us to get to the point where things can happen to the site, because it seems to me, unless I've misread the report, it's a very negative point of view in terms of it doesn't seem to be able to go anywhere, particularly as it says at the end, potential costs relate to the need for high quality design given its prominent location. So I think if we're all working towards giving a high quality design, we need to get the three major outstanding problems identified by this report out the way. So that is what I call for a seconder to support me in getting these things pushed through, so that hopefully in the next couple of months we can work with resources to deliver some form of things for the Queen's Drive project. So I will throw it open to my fellow committee members.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Sarah. So our next person I have on is, I've got several people, and the order will be Councillor Davey, Councillor Gazzard, Councillor Ledger, Councillor Armstrong, and we've got Tim, and we're all around. So we've got quite a few people. So Councillor Davey first, please.
Thank you for that concise report, Ed. That's very helpful. I just for a bit of clarity and a bit of history, could you explain who made the 2014 application that was granted, the outline application, and why did it never see the light of day? Why was it never carried through, apart from the water sports centre, of course, although I have some problems with the name of the water sports centre, since I've seen a number of uses taking place there, but I have yet to see any evidence of any water sports. But however, leaving that aside, it has been delivered, and I'm just interested in who made the application and where you think it went wrong, because we clearly don't want to go down the same route again with the attendant risks on that. I'd also like your comment on whether we could have some kind of permanent site that has planning permission for temporary attractions. So you don't need lots of temporary planning permissions, but you have a permanent site where you have temporary attractions. And I'm thinking of, I took my grandchildren down the seafront this year. They loved the swing boats, and they loved the various inflatable things that were there. I mean, to call them bouncy castles is an understatement. They were kind of inflatable attractions, and they weren't cheap, but I've got to say they were extremely popular. And great fun. The kids had a great time on them. So I'd appreciate your comment on whether we could have some kind of permanent site on which you could put temporary attractions. Thank you.
Ed, did you want to come back now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, in terms of the 2014 application, it was the council making an application to itself. In terms of that, the only element actually that was implemented under that consent was the realignment of the road, because the water sports centre was actually done as a separate full application in the end, and that is that consent that was implemented. I couldn't comment on why it wasn't carried out. Is not an area that I'm personally responsible for, so maybe Tim might be able to help you with that particular issue. With regard to a permanent consent, I mean, I say you could certainly apply for a permanent consent for the temporary attractions that are there at the moment, or to change, or for us to look at different temporary attractions or different restrictions in terms of that. I don't see any reason why we couldn't look at that and potentially consider a permanent consent for temporary attractions that gives flexibility in terms of a temporary range of uses in the long term. So no, I don't think there's a big issue with that from a planning perspective, as long as the consent, prescribes limitations in things like the nature of those uses, the height of any structures and things, as the current temporary consents have done for the uses that are on the site at the moment. If I may, Chair, just while speaking, I did like to just quickly respond to Councillor de Sarum's comments, and all I would say is, in terms of doing those flood risk assessment and habitat regulations assessments, we would need to understand what the mix of uses and the nature of the developments proposed to go on the site is in order to do those assessments. They're not just blanket assessments for the site, they are specific to the nature of the development that you're looking to bring forward on that site. So a decision on that would need to be made first before those assessments could be undertaken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed, for that clarification. Councillor Steve Gazzard, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tim and Ed, for that, as has been said, concise report. I've got a question first, and then I just want to make a couple of comments if I could. I thought when we first talked about Queen's Drive many years ago that there was a habitat survey that was undertaken, because I can remember us talking about the badgers and the wildlife down there and moving the protected grasses that we did. So I'm a little bit confused. I'd like some clarity on that. In regards to the flood risk, I thought that when Sideshore was built, and like my colleague Ollie Davey, I can't understand why they used the name. I thought they would have had a different name, because I agree with what Ollie says about what goes on down there. I thought that there was a flood risk that was done for that. So surely, Queen's Drive is just across the road. Do we need to do another flood risk? Because really, the bulk of it's already been done. But I'll come on to my observations now. Like all of you, I'm sure you've all been down the seafront since COVID and this summer. We haven't had a brilliant summer sunshine-wise, but it's been extremely popular down there, what we've managed to install this year. And I would hate for us to suddenly now put the brakes on, and then come April, we haven't got any permission to do anything down there. So I personally would support making what we got temporary down there permanent at the moment, because we've got to move forward on this, and holiday makers and locals, as far as I can see, are happy with what we've got down there. Yes, Dinosaur Park needs some work on, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that later on. But I think we need to crack on and make what we've got there temporary at the moment permanent. But I say that's just my observations. But I'll be interested if you could just give me an update on those questions, please, Ed.
Chair, would you like me to respond to that?
Yes, please, if you would mind. Yes, that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, Councillor, my understanding is that the assessments that were carried out of the Queen's Drive site at the time of the 2014 application were the ecological assessments were of the site itself. So checking that there were no specific habitats on the site itself, so bat activity, those sorts of things on the site itself. What wasn't done was the impact assessment, looking at the impacts on the ex-estuary. So, for example, would those uses generate additional recreational activity taking place on the Ex within the special area of conservation that actually runs along the seafront as well? Obviously, if we're having holiday accommodation and things within there, then it's potentially bringing more people to the site, more people undertaking water sports activities in the protected habitat, and therefore more impacts that would need to be assessed. And the only reason that work wasn't done at that time was because the assessments that helped us to understand the impacts of recreational activity on the habitat were still being produced at that time. So we didn't have a policy that actually required mitigation to be provided and for us to have those assessments at that time. That's something that's happened since 2014. So they weren't done at that time, they would now need to be done. In terms of flood risk assessment, you're quite right. The side shore application would have had a flood risk assessment as part of that, but they are site specific and also specific to the nature of the uses that are being undertaken on the site. So you would still need to do new flood risk assessments for whatever activities you're looking to bring forward on the Queen's Drive site as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Ed, Councillor Dan Ledger, you're next, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of questions. When we actually decide the uses of everything, would we be resubmitting an outline planning application again, or would we be looking at going straight in for a full application? I don't know if that's for Tim or for Ed. And then just for Ed specifically, the regeneration master plan for Exmouth was adopted in 2011. So that's all obviously 10 years old now. Is there any plans to relook at that so that we can master plan the area again, or is it that we are just looking at this specific Queen's Drive area and that's where we're going to be putting forward the applications for?
Ed, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, probably a double header for me and Tim, actually, this one. I mean, in terms of the choice of application, it's entirely up to the applicant whether they wish to make an outline application and establish a principle and then follow that with reserved matters applications, or make a full application up front. There are pros and cons either way. Obviously, a full application has greater upfront costs associated with it, but can ultimately be quicker. Obviously gives you just a single consent rather than the issue of an outline having to be followed by subsequent reserved matters applications. Having said that, if we were to find some way of making progress and incorporating any proposals in the local plan and you had an allocation in the local plan, then I would suggest an outline application would be redundant, really, because it effectively gives you outline consent, having an allocation in the local plan, at which point going for full application makes more sense. But Tim might have a different perspective on that from a property and development perspective. In terms of the master plan from 2011, I would have thought that that's a question for members as to whether or not they want to revisit that work and look on a wider scale at the regeneration opportunities within the town, or keep the remit very much to Queen's Drive itself. Again, there are implications for the local plan in terms of that, because logically, you know, if we were looking at a wider scale regeneration of Exmouth as a town, looking at some of the other sites that were looked at in 2011 again, then logically that's something that should be embedded in the local plan. Exmouth is our biggest town, so a full-on regeneration project in the town would be quite a significant planning development that should be incorporated into the local plan. And so we need to be thinking about that now and incorporating that in if that is members' aspiration. But as I say, there's a lot of work that would need to be done in terms of understanding the impact of that, establishing the evidence base for that, and understanding what those proposals would be and what allocations and policies would be needed within the local plan. As things stand, that hasn't been on the table, so it could have fairly significant implications for the timetable we're currently moving forward on for the local plan, if that's members' wish to broaden this work out to a wider regeneration programme again. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong, please, and then Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much. And thank you, Ed, for your report. And according to your report, the site seems as if it should really be limited to non-residential use due to its flood zone 3 designation, risk to habitat, and all the things we've already said about it being a sensitive area and protection of habitats and so on. So that leads me to think that it just seems a big shame to me that we seem to have come full circle from 7 years ago, 2014, when certain development proposals for the phase 3 site were considered by the council. one such developer spent in the region of £50,000 on proposals, which were turned down in favour of another developer that is now bankrupt. And I'm sure Ed will know what that's about. And you know, the reasons for turning those suggestions down were quite dubious, to say the least. Had this rejected development been accepted, the council would have been in regular receipt of income from rent and rates, plus the provision of all age family entertainment and facilities, which is what the public seem to want on that site. It will fit with the restrictions on the site. So there would be no housing development, no hotel development, but it's an area for family entertainment, as has been shown by the temporary users. So what I like to suggest is that as a delivery group and council, we revisit any such proposed investments which were refused in the past, just to give them a second chance to come back, and knowing what journey we've been through the last 7 years, just to try and come to some agreement at least as to whether those sorts of proposals are still possible, whether they're acceptable, whether when consulting with the public that they would be happy with them. And I really strongly feel that it would be a lost opportunity if any such proposals were not at least considered in order to move this project forward in a positive way. And I would really urge this delivery group to pursue that. And just to ask Ed and Tim what they think about that in relation to the planning applications that would be needed and so on. But as Ed has already said, we need to decide as a group and as a council what we're going to be doing on this site. And that has been the nub of the issue for all these years. And it's just really frustrating, because I know that plans were made all those years ago that were thrown out for whatever reason. And at the time, presumably it was thought that a big developer from outside would be able to deliver what we wanted. But that went pear-shaped, as we all know. So what I'd like to say is, please, through the chair, could we revisit any such proposed investments which were refused in the past, just to look at them with no commitments to anything, but just to re-look at them, and for us all to consider, and also to take in any other proposals, current proposals that people may want to do. And I'm talking here now not about temporary proposals, but proposals that would be committed to by the council, that if things went ahead and they seemed popular, that they'd be given a long-term lease and some security, and hopefully that would help to resolve the issues and the heartache that we've had for all these years on this site. I just wanted to ask what Ed and or possibly Tim thought about that idea. And I know you can't comment, either of you, particularly on what members might want to do about looking at other proposals. But in planning terms, how would that work if we were looking at permanent sites? And it's similar to what Councillor Ledger has said, I think, about the planning approval. So, Chair, I wonder if Ed or Tim would like to respond to that.
Ed, did you wish to reply?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure there's a great deal I can say, to be honest, because my knowledge is a bit sketchy when it comes to some of these alternative uses that may have been looked at and discussed but not come through the planning process. Obviously, my knowledge is more around the planning applications that are listed in my report, which doesn't include larger scale regeneration proposals that may have been looked at and discussed but not necessarily come through the planning process. So my best advice would be that we need to move forward and look ahead and consider what's on the table. I'm not sure there's a great deal of merit in going back over what may have been on the table at a point in time in the past, but Tim can probably say more on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Tim, would you like to briefly comment about that, because I know that's coming up later on the agenda, but tell me.
Yeah, if I can briefly comment on that, Chair, and then perhaps if I can come back in a minute to, I think after probably Councillor Arnott, just to respond on various issues that we mentioned, but I think I need to come back on. But picking up specifically on that last point about not dismissing any idea that's been put forward previously, no, absolutely not. What we are going to be doing, and this sort of, the more I've listened to this discussion, the more I'm wishing actually item 2 on the agenda, the next item on the agenda was in advance of this item. So I think it would have helped frame the discussion. But ultimately, we are going to be engaging and consulting with stakeholders, public members, over the course of the winter into next spring over future uses. Now, and that's been discussed previously at the delivery group. Now, that needs to consider all options, and I would say don't dismiss completely the hotel idea, but likewise, don't dismiss any of the ideas that have been put forward previously. It needs to consider everything. Ultimately, we'll report back to members to consider the various options to move this forward. Yeah, there have been some really good ideas put forward in the past. The market is different now, post-COVID. Some of those schemes, as a result, may no longer be viable. Other schemes that perhaps weren't viable may now be very viable. So yeah, absolutely consider all of those ideas. Hence the fact that we're doing a wide piece of engagement. This isn't just a quick short piece of work to then come back with the previous ideas. This is to look at all options. So hopefully that gives you some comfort, Councillor Armstrong. And then, Chair, if perhaps I can come back after Councillor Arnott and just pick up on some of the
Yes. We really must go to Councillor Bailey, who was champing at the bit. Thank you for being so patient, Councillor Bailey. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd like to just say to the committee that if we remember when it first started, I'm going back now, originally, the Water Sports Centre were the only people that came forward to go on the site. So we, the committee then agreed to move the road and put the Water Sports Centre there. We didn't get anything else on there, did we? If you remember, we're going way back now. Thank you, Ed and Tim, for your reports. I know what you're saying. I'm passionate about the dinosaur park, as you all know, and I'd like to see that being there permanently. But I, like everyone else, would like to see this delivery group deliver something and move this on. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Arnott.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, yes.
Okay, so the good news is you can't both see me and hear me, so you're going to have to go audio only, I'm afraid, rather than looking at my nose, because I'm practically on top of the laptop. I agree with Tim. It would actually have been helpful for the next item to have come before this. Let's just look at where we found ourselves. We got off to a good start this time last year, and what we agreed as a group was that we would make sure that this year was well managed and well planned and a success. And I like to think that at item 7 there'll be some evidence for that. But there was a quid pro quo, which was that we would defer for some months the long-term future of the Queen's Drive site. And the quid pro quo there was that we would have 2 new officers appointed to look at that vision, and in fact, a vision for Exmouth Town Centre as well. Now, the problem we find ourselves in the 6 months since we've last met is that for a number of reasons, the council has been unable to appoint those officers, and this will come up on the next agenda item. And I may as well say what I think about that here, rather than repeat it, if I may, Chair. which is that for that period of time, much of the period of time, this council was at the disadvantage that it was missing its most senior officer in human resources. And indeed, it was voted by a number of people, not me, I have to say, that that role would be redundant. However, out of the ensuing chaos, something very good has happened. We have now got a proper head of HR, Joe. And I think it is imperative that these jobs that we were promised would exist should be recruited. I think it's absolutely imperative, and we get ahead and do that as fast as possible now in the new atmosphere, people going back to work. You know, it's been said that these were undesirable jobs. Well, I'm sure Joe can help us address those and actually reach out and find the people we need. As far as this item is concerned, Chair, I think all we can do is note it with thanks to Ed. It basically summarises what is the planning position at the moment. I don't think we can make a decision on it. It is what it is. And I would also suggest, Chair, that and I don't know what the plan is, but I think the next meeting of this group, I would suggest should be in 1 month's time, because we will soon start finding an impatience from the people of Exmouth around this, and we need to act. And as Councillor Aurora Bailey has said, actually start giving a sense that we're delivering. Now, I think the other point that Councillor Armstrong has made, I entirely agree with, but I do wonder whether when I was chair, I was a bit too nice and a bit too naive. There was an idea that we would take what had happened in Exmouth to scrutiny. And it just looked on balance that what that would do, with various officer issues underneath it as well, would just rip off the sticking plaster and cause an unnecessary series of battles. But as I said, the quid pro quo was, okay, let's take that as read and move forward, because we've got these two new officers who are going to take this forward for us. Now, no blame is attached at all. I'm sure he understands this to Tim, that these officers haven't. Tim has been working every part of his body off senseless for the last year, absolutely clearly. And you know, this summer has been extraordinarily stressful. But this committee, as a result of our being unable to recruit, is under-resourced. And this is not the agenda we would have wanted to be debating today, which is basically something informing us of the planning context, which is useful. A report on how things have done this year, which is useful in its own way, and then, which I guess is what's coming next. And sorry, Tim, to spike your guns slightly, a recommendation of us finding another way than appointing our own two officers. I think if we don't do that, we're going to have to consider, Chair, whether this matter does have to go back to scrutiny after all. You know, we may have to start looking at what has happened in the past. We may have to start looking at what were quite plainly viable options down there, which were presented, as Councillor Armstrong has said, 5, 6, 7 years ago by people who really knew what they were doing down there, instead of which we found ourselves in bed with some fly-by-night operation called Moray Capital. Now, I think enough has been said about that in a way. You know, it didn't need scrutiny to go back over it, but maybe it does. Maybe the message hasn't got home. We really cocked this up in the past. So it's a question of moving this forward now as urgently as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Arnott. I can confirm that the next meeting of this group is at the beginning of next month, on October. And I think that we can, we certainly need to push. I'm very concerned that we don't run out of planning permission next spring. I think that's an absolutely crucial thing that we need to make sure is resolved. Okay, Tim, did you want to come back on that at all, please?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, if I just pick up very briefly on some of the sort of questions that have recently been asked for me to respond to. So why the previous planning consent, permanent consent, wasn't implemented? We could spend the entire day discussing that, so I'm not intending to do that now. But there was a very detailed briefing note that I did for the delivery group last autumn, and in essence, the reasons are set out there as to why we are where we are. In terms of the flood risk assessment and the habitat mitigation assessment, which Councillor de Sarum, I think, suggested, could we as a committee agree to just get on with? Now, as Ed came back on and said, well, actually, it relates to the use, so it's specific to the use. Now, at this stage, we don't know what the use is going to be, and we don't want to preempt what any final outcome might be. However, at the same time, we then have the issue which Ed talks us through in terms of the timing with the local plan. So it's a difficult one, but ultimately, there's a big piece of work, a very expensive piece of work that's going to be undertaken over the next 12 months that will lead us to a report through this group and onto Cabinet as to the future use of this site. And we obviously shouldn't be prejudging what the outcome might be. There was a question asked or comment made about making the temporary planning consent permanent. In terms of sort of an outcome from and a recommendation from this meeting, I think the temporary consent, we do need as officers a steer as to where we're going next year. Now, I suspect from all of what I've heard in this meeting and what I know very well anyway, the decision will be, I'm sure, that we need to renew the planning consent for temporary uses, either on temporary basis or on a permanent basis. I'm not envisaging the response from today's meeting being no, don't renew it and close the site. So I could do with a steer there, because clearly as officers, we've got quite a lot of work then to do between now and next February when that consent expires. But whether it's another temporary consent or a permanent consent for the temporary uses, yes, a permanent consent for temporary uses may complicate things a little bit, but ultimately as landowner, it doesn't prejudge what we as a landowner may ultimately decide we want to use the site for, which may be a continuation of those temporary uses, or indeed could be something else. There was a question asked about the timing of all of this with the wider regeneration of Exmouth. And I suppose I just wanted to bring the group back to the fact that the work that we're going to be doing, and indeed some elements have already started, relates to Exmouth. It doesn't just relate to Queen's Drive. So indeed, the work that will come back to members as a series of options next summer will indeed cover Exmouth, not just Queen's Drive, which I'm sure from a planning perspective, yeah, no doubt causes sort of further concerns for Ed regarding timing. There was a comment made about the site not being suitable for residential uses and hotel uses. And I think Ed picked up on that earlier. It didn't say that it's not suitable. It said to be suitable, you need to carry out certain mitigation factors. I don't, sorry if I've quoted you wrongly there, Ed, but I think that was broadly what you were saying. And the final point I wanted to raise, yes, so I picked up on that already, which was about not dismissing any of the ideas that previously been put forward by different groups. So yeah, so thank you for that. I think I've now responded to any of the questions that were sort of directed to me.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Tim. Now, I have two more raised hands, Councillor de Sarum and then Councillor Miller. So Councillor de Sarum, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Tim, very much for responding in such a positive way to my questions. And I think that I note from what you said, we don't know what the use will be, and its timing with the local plan. And I also note that you have said it's a big piece of expensive work. And I think that takes us back to the leader's earlier comments about the need to get the jobs in place in order to do this. So I'm quite happy if we get the jobs in place and we go forward with some form of plan, at least as Councillor Bailey and others have said, that would be something positive. And I feel the need of the meeting is that we would actually want to have maybe a permanent consent for temporary attractions. I feel that that's something that members might be getting behind, but certainly we need to do something with the site, and we need to look at it. I appreciate what you said, the market is different now. So I'm pleased that the chair is going to have another meeting next month, because I think that at that meeting, we need to fully explore all the available options that we can have in order that we can give the proper steer to the officers as they're requesting. So thank you very much indeed, Chair, most positive.
Thank you, Councillor Desar. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. We do have to make a decision today, I think. We can't just note the report. Otherwise, we will no longer have any permission to use the site for its current purpose. My preference would be to make it permanent, but that doesn't mean we don't have longer term aspirations to let out the site on a commercial rate for non-residential attractions, which is what the public wants, which Councillor Armstrong has said, an upgrade of the kind we used to have on the site with Chris Wright. And we let that out at a commercial rate and the council got money for it. Currently, the Queen's Drive site is costing the council quite a lot of money to run. We are paying, and it is an attraction, and the public like it, but it is costing the council money. So in the longer term, in my view, we do have to look at letting it out. This is a prime site, but as Councillor Armstrong has said, and I completely agree with her, the preference from the local public is that it has to be non-residential, so no hotel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to correct something that Councillor Bailey said earlier, and forgive me, Aurora, if I misunderstood you here, but I thought that Councillor Bailey said it was this committee that agreed to the rerouting of the road past the Water Sports Centre, and it wasn't. This committee didn't exist when the road was rerouted, and I don't quite know who did take that decision. I just going on to the temporary attractions. I mean, I quite favour the idea of some kind of permanent site for temporary pop-up attractions, but you can't have the whole site like that. So I think we do need some permanent attractions down there as well, so people know what they're going to find when they get there. And I'd just be interested to hear from officers, how exactly do we move forward with that? Do we allocate a zone saying this is for some kind of permanent attraction on the site, and then seek operators willing to do that? I'm not a planner, and I want to know how we move forward with this. I'm very keen, as everybody is, I think, to get on with this now, and get something there. At the same time, we've got to get it right, and particularly if we're going to have permanent attractions down there. As far as the idea of the hotel is concerned, yes, I appreciate you could have a hotel in a flood zone, with certain safeguards in place. It's going to go down like a lead balloon with local people, but as Councillor Wright said at one of the early meetings, local people are not interested in a hotel because they're not the people who are going to use it. However, we've already got Premier Inn along the seafront, and I understand that's been extremely successful, and I would query whether we need yet another hotel when a couple recently went out of business and are hoping to be revitalised. And I know we're in extraordinary times, but I would just caution against any kind of hotel down there, because personally I don't feel it's the best use of that area. We want things that are going to bring people in, and a hotel, yeah, brings people in, but then they may well travel out again. We want things that are going to attract people down there as activities where they're going to spend money on it. Yeah, I'm just interested in what officers feel is the way to move forward here.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bailey, did you wish to come back to Councillor? Sorry, Councillor Bailey, David, yes. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Davey. No, I wasn't saying this committee voted in for the side shore to be there, but I'm talking about the bigger picture of Queen's Drive. When it originally started, we had the regeneration of the seafront, but I know we're a new group, but therefore being a new group, we should be able to move this on. I was just saying that the Water Sports Centre are the only people that originally came forward to go on the site. Now we're moving on to the next phases of the site. And that's all I was saying. I wasn't saying this committee actually did it. I apologise for that. But what I'm saying is I would like to see this moving on now, because it's been going on far too long. And, you know, we're all looking for something exciting there, the best that we can get. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes. I think we're coming towards the end of this particular agenda item. It's very clear to me that the view of members is that we go ahead and have some form of planning permission. We must have the site open next year. We've got the Queen's Platinum Jubilee coming up next June. Not to have that not be open for that would just be absolutely an absurdity. And you know, I'm sure we will be able to attract people. Item 7, I think, will give us some idea of the fact people have been attracted to the site. So I think we need to get on with this now, and we need to be quite active. And I think the idea for me, the idea of a permanent application that allows temporary uses is a very sensible thing. I am still minded about COVID personally. I think we still have a way to go with this. There are changes being put forward. I noticed from the paper reports about the government allowing the more marquees for use for various licenses and so on, license applications, license premises rather, sorry. So we still have a way to go. An open air set of attractions, I think, has much to be said for it, much to be said for it. Councillor Arnott, did you have your hand up earlier on? No? Did you have your hand up earlier on?
I did, Chair, and then I came in with a round of applause for you. And I was only going to say very briefly that I totally get the hotel objection thing, but I think you summarised the meeting so well that perhaps nothing more needs to be said on that.
Okay.
Where I caution about a statement that forever says there'll never be a hotel is, what if, for example, somebody came forward with some extraordinary, you know, Dutch thing on stilts with organic modules where everybody only ate sea kelp for breakfast and so forth. You know, it's just there may be some kind of you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be another Premier Inn. I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here very much, absolutely. But you know, I'm just saying, you know, if you cut that out altogether, you might lose the opportunity for somebody to come forward with an extraordinary proposal. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Gazzard.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I was going to raise the issue that he did about the Queen's Special Day next year, but it's absolutely imperative, Chair, that we have something up and running and available for use come April of next year. So I would like to propose that we go for a permanent an application for you know, the uses that are already down there, because otherwise, if we don't, we could end up with everything being off the site, and I'm sure none of us want that.
Okay, right. Thank you for that proposal. Is there a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Davey. That's a seconder. Right. Okay. Can we go to a vote, please, Sarah?
Yes, Chair. If members would like to use their green ticks to show their support.
Oh, hang on.
And just to be clear, that's a recommendation that's going on to Cabinet, isn't it?
Yes, recommendation to Cabinet, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Bailey has raised her hand. She doesn't have a green tick, but that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, Chair, that I'm having trouble finding my green tick. So can I just put my hand up?
Yeah,
it's a bit slow today, the Zoom, isn't it? A bit slow.
Yeah.
In that case, that's 9 green ticks. I can't see any red crosses, and I can't see any hands raised in abstention.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Right, okay, good. So I think that's given us a steer. I think we will revisit that at the next meeting. And I think it's time we shall move on to agenda item 6, resourcing and next steps. Tim, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a verbal update. If I can, just before Ed dives out of this, Ed, if you could just stay in on this item, because there may be some crossover with the last item, but I can promise you can leave after this item. So yeah, this is a verbal update on resourcing. Some of what I was going to say we've actually already covered in a previous agenda item. Just bear with me, it's quite a brief verbal update, and then obviously we can open it up to questions if there are any. So back at the last delivery group meeting in March, we debated, or members debated, key opportunity, well, 3 items really: key opportunity / untapped potential for place and prosperity interventions in Exmouth. Secondly, the reliance that should or should not be placed on the previous consultation and the visioning work. And on that point, that goes back to something I've talked about in the previous agenda item. We don't dismiss anything. We don't ignore, and the clear steer that I had at the last meeting was we don't ignore the work that Hemingway Design and others have done in the past. But at the same time, we don't allow that to preempt what the outcome is moving forward. So we don't ignore it, but at the same time, we don't allow it to direct where we go moving forward. This is a new exercise, new consultation and engagement. Thirdly, members debated what success would look like in 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. Now, there was some good information, some good detail that came out of that debate, which I needed in terms of structuring what these 2 new interim roles would be. We're looking at development surveyor, and also we're looking at an engagement / consultation officer, probably with the bulk of the work, I say probably, with the bulk of the work in the first 6 months being through the engagement consultation officer role, as opposed to the development surveyor role. Now, we've explored the various recruitment opportunities for a fixed term post. I've had discussions with a number of recruitment consultants, and I've also spoken to 3 individuals that I know and have worked with in the past, or certainly come across in the past, that have delivered similar pieces of work elsewhere and elsewhere regionally. We've struggled to get interest in the Exmouth project. As you'd expect, possible candidates, the first thing they do is look at, you Google Queen's Drive, and it's clear, I think, to anyone that this isn't a straightforward project, as we know very, very well, and hence why we are where we are. So I also, alongside that, had concerns around the breadth of skill sets needed, but also the resilience and continuity should they leave. The worst thing to happen would be to get a resource, introduce them to a delivery group, introduce them to stakeholders, have a detailed project plan, and then have to revisit it a couple of months later when they leave. But also the importance of a really, really strong track record of delivery, and delivery regionally, something that that stakeholders, members of the public, the Town Council, Chamber of Commerce, our own members, can actually visualise. So other schemes that they've delivered, other placemaking schemes in coastal seafront locations. So they were all really, really key, which again continues to sort of narrow down those opportunities, which led us to looking at this in a slightly different way, in that there are a number of external organisations who have delivered these sorts of placemaking projects end to end, and that's what we're looking for. I'm not looking for a commercial agent to come in and tell us on commercial opportunities. I'm looking at someone who can do this end to end, and with a really, really strong emphasis towards placemaking, not a strong emphasis towards commercial. So it's around placemaking. And who have done this for other local authorities within Devon. Now, there are a couple of those organisations that spring to mind. Conscious that this is a public meeting, I don't want to disclose details at this stage of parties, but some of you may well have a good guess at who those sorts of organisations might be. Probably the leading organisation for this sort of work, Simon Davey and I met with back in August to discuss their skill sets, what they could bring to a project like this. They've been provided with a lot of information, a lot of background information, the previous reports I've taken to a delivery group meeting and other wider information. And they'd reviewed all of that prior to the meeting back in August. Really, really positive meeting in August. We discussed procurement and how we could make this happen. I'm now expecting a detailed brief from them over the coming weeks. When I've got that, I will then be sharing it, and I have been updating both the leader and Councillor Hookway during these discussions. Once we've got the detailed brief back from them, I will share it initially with Councillor Hookway as chair, and also Councillor Arnott's leader, for their initial thoughts. And if that is seen as a credible way forward, then we will be bringing it back through the delivery group in the first instance. Now, we are now back to much more frequent meetings for delivery groups. So the next delivery group meeting is the 19th of October. So I'm hoping to have a really good update for that. So their work, and this last bit, I think we have covered already, but I just want to recap. Their work will involve consultation, engagement, and due diligence on all opportunities. Now, I envisage that piece of work, subject to successful appointment, being undertaken during the winter and spring, with a report then back through the delivery group onto Cabinet during next summer. And talking through with the organisation we met with back in August, that was a sort of timescale that they could see being appropriate for this type of exercise. I think there's a danger that we rush the consultation engagement piece of work, which fundamentally is the most important piece of work in this exercise. And then a series of options will come back to members. And at this stage, I think it's really important that we don't sort of preempt or prejudge what those options might be. And there was a comment made towards the end of the last agenda item, I think it was by Councillor Davey, regarding pop-ups and what would the planning position be for making part of that site suitable for pop-ups. Well, again, I think that's something that we need to consider as part of those options at that time, rather than at this time. So, so I've sort of summed up where we are. As I said, in hindsight, this agenda item prior to Ed's might have helped, but anyway, we are where we are. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Tim. Councillor Paul Miller, please.
Thank you. I'm really glad that we're going to have a real public consultation on the uses. I don't think the community has previously been consulted in a way where their views have been valued, in my view. I have a particular question. I think it's maybe to the members of the delivery group, because this is more of a kind of political issue, I think, on fitness space. I can see the rent has been reduced to £100 a month here, and there are issues with people not knowing that it's a site that is being leased. I personally question the logic behind making this a fitness space. It was bringing in quite a lot of revenue as a temporary car park. It was, and I just can't see, when you've got the mayor across the road, I just question who's interested in using that space, because I always see it empty. So I think that's the fitness space is something we really need to think about, I think, going forward. So I would like
Chair,
to
I think Councillor Miller might be on the next agenda item.
Yes, it is in the next agenda item, yes.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Councillor, yes, okay. Yeah,
apologies.
sorry. Yeah, okay, never mind. Thank you, Councillor Arnold, for that. Okay, I was just about to say that. Councillor Gazard, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm having trouble on my thing. Yeah, just a question to Tim, if I could. Obviously, you've got somebody in mind, Tim, to do this. It's unfortunate that we're not going to know until another month who they are, because obviously we're supposed to be open and transparent on this working party. But what's going to be the cost? Have we got a cost for it, please?
Tim?
Yeah, so no, we don't have a cost yet. What we do have, however, is a decision via this group onto Cabinet, or a recommendation onto Cabinet, and then decision by Council to make £200,000 available. So £200,000 is the sum of money that is available, that is out there in the public domain. So that we are looking at scoping up a piece of work that utilises, I strongly suspect, that full £200,000, but I suspect it will be in phases. So the first part of the first phase will be consultation, engagement, preparation with full due diligence, evaluation, planning, other advice to delivery group and then on to Cabinet next summer. That would be the first part of that work, and that isn't anticipated to obviously be to run into the 200,000 mark. But then with delivery of a number of those projects thereafter, subject to obviously the decision by Cabinet, I took from, I think it was the previous delivery group meeting, a very, very strong message around this isn't just about producing a paper, this is about delivering something. Now, clearly we need to produce a paper before we can deliver it, but this is about delivery. So that is the budget available, and it's in the public domain. The consultants are very aware of that, and we've discussed the sort of phasing of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Ed, you wanted to come in there?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to again draw members' attention to the timetable of all of this with local plan production. I did include a brief timetable in the planning briefing paper. So we're looking to consult on a draft plan early summer next year, move into consultation on a publication draft, which is effectively a final draft of the plan, sort of October next year. So there are some significant timing issues here with production of the local plan. As I said before, if members were looking for a large-scale regeneration programme within Exmouth during this local plan period, then it should be in the local plan, and its impact should be assessed through the local plan. In particular, you know, if those proposals included something like a further water sports centre or a hotel, there could be significant impacts on the protected habitats that need to be assessed through the local plan process. So we just need to give some very careful thought to how these things fit together, both in terms of the soundness of the local plan, but also from a point of view of public engagement and communications over this. We could be consulting on a draft local plan at around the same time we're consulting on proposals that come out of this work. So that may need some careful thought about how that fits together, how that's communicated, and how that works. Possibly not for discussion now, but just to highlight those issues that they will need further thought and consideration by members, because there are some difficulties, I think, both technically for the local plan and reputationally of running these things in parallel, but not conjoined. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very timely warning. I know there have been initiatives about development within Exmouth that clearly would not fit into part of the local plan. So we need to be very mindful of that. Thank you very much indeed for that warning. Very important. Councillor De Sarum was next, please, and then it's Councillor Arnott.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Tim, I think that's a most excellent report that you've delivered. I note that you're going to go out to this external organisation. Are they going to, as you said, see it through to the very end of the project, so that this will deliver the continuity that you were looking for? And also, having heard from Ed Freeman just now, I think that's a wonderful statement that Ed made. I think we should be very much concerned with fitting into the local plan, because otherwise, where do we go from here? We want to make sure that all deliveries fit in with the appropriate policies, and that the consultants that we do employ will be able to deliver to this timetable. So I don't know, maybe that's whether the chair will consider that when we're actually looking to appoint the external organisations, as to whether they could tailor their work that they're going to do so that we could meet the expectations within the local plan. As I personally am very keen to do that, but obviously I'm guided by other members' excellent thoughts. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Desarum. Yes, Councillor Arnott, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair, very much. Sorry to keep asking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, God, so sorry. Right. So yes, thanks, Tim, for the report. And of course, what we've got today is a verbal report, which is very helpful. It's informative. I think between now and the next meeting, Chair, what I would suggest is that, obviously as leader, with Jack as finance portfolio holder, you as chair of this committee, Tim and Simon, maybe the CEO as well. Let's have a good chat. I'm really grateful that Tim and Simon reached out and had this positive conversation with these potential external consultants, and that may well be the road ahead. I don't know, but I do think we just need to make a careful decision and bring in, sorry, Joe, head of HR as well. We need to make a careful decision. Is going outside the right thing to do? Now, I can really hear what Tim is saying, that we may acquire a wider skill set for the same amount of money for that. And I get that. You can really see the virtues. Equally, the words Exmouth and external consultants hasn't always gone well in the past. And I think the instinct of many of our members, our councillors, is to try and retain control as close as possible to the membership. So those two things are in the balance. So I just think, Chair, I mean, does that strike you as an agreeable idea if we can, perhaps you as chair, summon a meeting of those dramatis personae?
Yes. Yes, I'm quite happy to do that. Yes, okay. Quite happy to do that. Thank you. I'll speak with you about that later on, and we'll arrange a time. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, okay, so thank you for that, Tim. That was very helpful. Okay, so we're now going on to Part B matters, because we have to deal with issues that have to be done in private. Now, although I have the official statement, I'm not obliged, apparently not about to leave it, so to read it. So therefore, under terms of local government legislation, I'm now asking members, are we happy to go to private session? If members are happy, could they please show their hands, either green or otherwise? Sarah, can you just, this is a bit slow, this Zoom today, isn't it? Okay, right. Do we have a, Sarah?
Yes, Chair, you do. I can see 7 green ticks.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Sarah, could you now do the necessary and put us into private session, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to stop the live stream, and then if non-members of this group would like to leave the meeting, or we will put you in the waiting room, and I'll tell you when you're ready to